Welcome. Thank you for joining us on Coaches on Couches, episode 10, June 19th, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. My name is John Min. I'm the USECA video chairman, and with my co-host, Pat Goldsmith from Niagara Gymnastics in Region 6. Today, we have a wonderful panel of experts in their field. We call the episode PreHab, ReHab, Our Favorite Habs, the Experts. We have Dr. Ian Kreider, Dr. Joshua Eldridge, who is not quite here yet. We're hoping he'll join us a little bit later. Dr. Elspeth Hart and Gina Pongetti Angeletti. Is that pronounced correctly? I hope I got it right.
Sounds fabulous.
Once again, I ask spectators and audience to just make sure your mic is on mute and that your video is off. That way we can give our full attention, our bandwidth and everything to our guest speakers. Today, actually, I'd like them to introduce themselves because we have such a wonderful panel, and all of them, of course, are experts in their own field. This is just a little promo for next week. Next week's episode, we have Trampoline Air Awareness and Flight with Joy Umenhofer, Thomas Hamblin, Steve Gluckstein, and Heather Edwards. Thank you so much. All right, so let's go to Dr. Elspeth Hart. Do you mind just introduce yourself to the audience and let us know what is your relationship with gymnastics?
Perfect. Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much for having me. As John said, my name is Elspeth Hart. I go by Ellie. That's a little easier of a nickname for me there. I was actually a Region 6 Level 10 gymnast, then went on, did Division I college gymnastics at James Madison University. While I was there, I studied athletic training sports medicine. I then graduated, passed my boards, became a certified athletic trainer. I loved it, worked for my gym for 2 years. I then went on, got my master's, became a physician assistant. I started working for Boston Children's Hospital under Dr. Lyle McKaylee, who's one of the founders of pediatric sports medicine. I then went on and got my doctorate and then started what's called gymnastics medicine. So gymnastics medicine is a gymnastics-specific sports medicine field that looks at gymnastics-specific diagnosis, treatment, education, and research, and hoping that one day we can grow it into a huge fellowship and a huge program to continue for coaches, parents, and gymnasts to learn about gymnastics injuries.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ian Kreider, if you can unmute yourself, you're next.
Hey, yeah, so I'm Dr. Ian Kreider. So I was a gymnast for 16 years, all the way through college, got to compete for Springfield College in Massachusetts for 4 years, which was an amazing time, a lot of fun. And then went on to Memphis, Tennessee at the University of Tennessee Health Science Center to get my doctorate in physical therapy. And then floated around Kentucky for a while, kind of lost track of the sport, came back and found some interesting stuff. And so been back in it, trying to help the sport. I own my own physical therapy practice called Elevate Physical Therapy. And then I also do the gymnastics doc stuff online where I help parents and coaches learn how to keep their kids healthy, happy, and safe.
Wonderful. And then Gina Pongetti, please.
Hi, Gina Pongetti. I was a gymnast for 14 years, Region 5, and did not go on to do college. Broke my spine twice in '95, so decided that I wanted to go to Marquette and do physical therapy and essentially take over running medical for USA Gymnastics, which was my goal when I was 14 and told all of my teammates. So didn't quite accomplish that, but I guess pretty darn close with the amount of time and years and everything that I have been involved in from a private sector perspective as well as USAG. I was on USA Gymnastics medical staff healthcare referral network for 8-9 years. I have worked over 27 meets, traveled nationally and internationally, as well as been the personal PT and taken care of over 100 of our national team members and Olympians, including a good majority of the current. So I own Achieve Physical Therapy, which is a local physical therapy clinic, and we take anyone and everyone sports medicine based. But MedGym is my online equivalent to Ian's gymnastics doc, if you will. we kind of do the same thing, which is amazing. And it's great to have, I think there's only about 10 of us in the country that actually kind of do what we do and have the knowledge from a PT and rehab perspective with Ellie as well. And it's great because it is such a small sport that there are a lot of people who dabble in gymnastic sports medicine, which is like dabbling in knife throwing. It's kind of hard to understand and it doesn't go very well. So my goal, of course, is to just, I love treating, but I'd like to transition life a little bit more to education and just making sure that everybody knows how to do both prevention and treatment. So the website is taken off during COVID, and private clinic visits are booking out, years. Of course, I think Ian's doing the same, where it's just really everybody is very interested in keeping their kids healthy, which is the goal. I have a master's in health communication as well as a master's in PT. So the communication aspect of the dichotomy between physician and athlete and healthcare provider and family and psychology is incredibly incredibly important to me, as is honesty in the sport with the athletes and their medical providers. So trying to make some waves within safe sport regarding that. And I think I'm doing it, which is great. So carry on.
Thank you so much, Gina.
Yep.
So as you can see, we have an amazing panel of experts who have so much expertise. They were gymnasts, they're athletes, through the collegiate era, they became professions in the medical, they still keep active with gymnasts and coaches and owners. So basically we are getting the best information, I think, humbly possible for our field of gymnastics. So I'm going to start us right off with a tough one. All right. The coronavirus, of course, has affected a lot of athletes in gyms. Now that they're opening gradually throughout the country, what is the biggest concern you see for athletes returning? Are they going to push themselves too hard? Are they going to lose skills? Your main concern on that topic, and I'd like to start with Elspeth first.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question. So as you know, John, I had set sort of some guidelines for Region 6 actually on how to return back to gymnastics after COVID, because I was very concerned about essentially having gymnasts go back too quickly. And that's part of one of my areas of the program as well that I do, which is a return to sport protocol. And so I think it's really important that our gymnasts slowly take their time getting back into the sport. And that means using each week to keep building on basics. And the Zoom meetings that coaches have been doing have been fantastic, but everyone here knows that's not the same as being in a gym, as pounding, as impacting and landing. Your Achilles can take 16 times your force just doing a roundup back handspring layout. And if we go right away back into that too quickly, we're going to have tons of injuries just occurring right away. So I think really focusing on a slow progression and building out your plan. And the progression should take at least 6 to 8 weeks to really slowly introduce everything into the sport. And that even goes for our compulsory kids as well. I know a lot of coaches will say, oh, well, it's just a level 4, or just a level 3. Well, we need to slowly introduce them back into the sport as well, so the bodies can adapt and take those forces.
Thank you so much. Ian, I'm going to ask you the same question, but then I'm going to also add on, how do you also deal with the athletes who are returning and, I hate to say it, taller, bigger, their bodies have basically changed? Can you unmute yourself, please?
Yeah, so my biggest concern, I think most coaches know to take their time now. But my biggest concern is that they're going to forget to save time for recovery. And so they're going to build, and then forget about, oh, wait, I was supposed to kind of take an easy week somewhere, or I was supposed to kick him out of the gym for a week, or whatever it was, right? Because they're going to think, oh, I lost all this time. And so we just got to build. We just got to go. We got to get ready for meet season. We just got to go. And there's this sense of urgency that I think people are going to forget, what we need to take time to back off every 4 weeks, every 6 weeks. We need to take time to back off a week and just take it easy and let their bodies recover and adapt. Because the human body is an amazing thing, and it can respond and it can adapt to so many crazy things, crazy forces, crazy stresses. But we got to give it the time to do that. So that's my biggest concern. And then one more time, what was your other question?
What about the gymnasts who are returning with their changes in their body, height,
right,
weight, all that?
Yeah. So with that, if coaches plan it right and they're doing this nice slow progression, I don't think it's going to affect people as much as it would have if it was, a 2-week time or a 4-week time. I think because they've had so much time off, they need to progress into it slowly anyway. Things are already going to feel weird for everyone. And so if you've grown 2 inches over the break, I think you're just going to feel weird like everybody else has. And you may not notice it all that much. So I don't think it's too concerning. But at the same time, we just got to, anytime you see those big growth spurts, you got to be careful of those growth-related injuries like Osgood and Sievers and things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. And Gina, same question?
Yeah, I agree with Ian wholeheartedly on cycling. Micro and macro cycling is something that I think not a lot of coaches do. I think part of that is just because there hasn't been a lot of sports science education that has been either provided for or demanded by governing bodies. And it's not just the US, it's everywhere. I think Australia does a great job in doing it. In Canada, you have to be a certified coach in order to coach. So I think that the coaches are so eager to understand the science behind it because most of them aren't athletic training majors or PT or PA or nurses or anything. So the concept of cycling is super important. Now, one of, like Ellie said, one of her focuses as mine is as well, is creating return to gym programs for people with injuries. So COVID is just a big giant injury, except it's just not a body specific injury. So you have 3 parts that I guess are my concern. One, what were the hidden injuries that were bothering people before COVID that they didn't address, that their parents and neighbors and everyone that they've gotten advice from said, oh, rest will help that, which it really doesn't most of the time. If it's a biomechanics issue, it still has to be addressed. So that's going to rear its head probably week 3 to 5 back in. The second thing is the growing issues when allowed to grow, when not pounded. This is pituitary, thyroid, etc. You are going to get hips. You're going to get female changes. Your hormones are going to go male and female side, and the height and the mechanics are going to change. So once that's there, you are more predisposed to feeling the symptoms of things like Osgood, Sievers, even things like OCD, Panners, when there's undue forces in joints that the muscles aren't ready for. So that's the second layer. And then the third layer, just like Ian said, is, or I don't remember who said it, but 6 to 8 weeks, I'm doing 10 to 12 week plans with my gyms, and we're doing 3 4-week cycles, and they are not allowed to have full skills and full routines back before 8, and they're not allowed to have full repetitions and load back. And we're having injured kids, and I'm having a kid in the gym actually doing pounding counts for people, so that we can actually make sure. It's very interesting to think I ran 3 miles today. Why not do 5 when you don't even realize how much of an increase that is? Just like saying, oh, well, why don't I just do 5 more fulls when I did 5? Because 10 really isn't that much, but it is double. So just teaching the sport science, but with Ellie and with Ian and I and everybody else around, trying to make it more palatable for people to understand that sports science books, I mean, I could write a 1,000-page book on it and 5 people would care. But when you actually write a 1-page article that says, listen, 5 times 2 is 10, that's double, even though 10 truly isn't a lot. Overtraining is a word, and overtraining just means it's too much for your system at that time, in that place, in that cycle. What could be for one gymnast is not for another. And that, I think, is what we just need to understand. Right now, everything to the body is overtraining if it's not done properly.
Thank you so much. Now, not to be devil's advocate, but let's say we don't have the time, and then college is starting up, or let's say high school season starting up in the fall, or some gyms, some states have gym programs that start in the fall, like compulsories and stuff, and they need to get going and competing in September, October. If that is the case, what would you recommend they do to do that safely, Elspeth?
Ooh, that's a good question. So, and it's definitely sort of hard to answer because I think, as all of us have already said, we're looking at plans that are, minimum 6 weeks. So if we're talking, you only have a 4-week period and you really haven't been doing anything, as a medical provider, and I'm sure the others will agree, I would advise against it, to be honest with you. The sport of gymnastics has all been a huge part of all of our lives. We're fortunate to still have our hands in it and working with gymnasts. But I would say, in terms of safety for the athlete, I would be very worried and very concerned about telling an athlete to go back faster than 6 weeks. As a sort of sports medicine provider, I couldn't clear someone. When we're thinking about how long it takes for a muscle to heal, a fracture to heal, OCD to heal, all these different things that everyone has already mentioned, you're already looking at that 6 to 8 week window. So from a truly mechanical and medical perspective, it really wouldn't be safe to. So I'm sort of hard pressed to kind of give you a firm answer to say, this is where I'd cut corners, because, I think that's where USA has gotten into a little bit of some trouble is, we can't cut corners anymore. It's really about the safety of the gymnast, the overall health of the gymnast. At some point, your gymnastics career has to end. So whether that's from an injury or another sport that you find, you want to make sure that at the end of the day, that gymnast, is healthy when she's 30, 40, 50, 60, that they can run a marathon if they want to after the sport. So I try to phrase all of the injuries, and if they are trying to go back quickly is, how would we feel 10 years from now? How would we feel 20 years from now? Will that one competition in September really change your life? And, if we're at the Olympic trials, if we're at the Olympics, if this really is a game changer, we can weigh the pros and cons and make sure everyone is involved. And that's your physical therapist, that's your orthopedic surgeon, that's your mom, your dad, your loved ones, and your coaches are all on that decision together. It's not just one person who's making it. So I apologize, kind of a roundabout answer for you, but I wouldn't recommend going faster than sort of a 6-week program.
No, quite honestly, I'm glad you said that. It's great to hear that kind of frankness, and hopefully more coaches will listen to the medical experts. Real quickly, everyone, I just want to introduce Dr. Joshua Eldridge. He's here with us. Doctor, if you don't mind, could you just tell everyone your background and how you relate in gymnastics?
Hey y'all, and I apologize very, very much for being here a little bit late. I got a little bit behind tonight. So I've been working with gymnasts for about 10 years. My wife was a gymnastics coach, and that's how I got into the sport of gymnastics. And so I didn't mean to necessarily get into gymnastics, but it just happened. And so for the last 10 years, I've been working with gymnasts at all different types of levels. And currently, I actually work at Fort Benning, Georgia, and I work with a lot of the soldiers on a recovery program for the soldiers coming out of Ranger School. And so that is a big project that I'm working on now. But it's really cool because it relates so closely to gymnasts, because gymnasts and soldiers are actually very similar in how they train. So it's not always there's a lot of takeaways between the two. So it's kind of neat how they work together. But that's kind of my background. I'm a chiropractor is my degree in what I do, but I'm very well-rounded with and work with a lot of different physical therapists and physicians throughout sport and throughout gymnastics. So that's kind of a little bit about me, and I'm excited to be here. So thank you so much, John, for having me here.
Thank you again for being here. So I'm going to go to Ian next. Basically, still following up the question for the coaches and the gymnastics programs that are going to start back in the fall and need to kind of get the athletes in a rush to ready for compete. What would you recommend, or what can they possibly do?
Yeah, so I'll give a little more straightforward answer. If you have a fall season, I would skip it. I just wouldn't do a fall season. I've told a lot of people I wouldn't, even the people that normally do December meets as like their early meet, I wouldn't even do a December meet. An early January meet is cutting it close, especially for our optionals. So yeah, if you have a fall schedule, I'd say let's build them for a year and have some fun the next year. Just because it's risking too much injury. The risk reward there is just way skewed. Maybe they'll have a good season, but I think only 25% of your team might have a good season. So instead, skip it, have some fun, have some really good off-season training where you can build some solid muscle, you can build some great power, you can go through several cycles of this instead of trying to rush it all and compact it into 6 or 8 weeks and then trying to all of a sudden gain endurance for a routine shape. So instead, just take some time, really build a strong foundation, and I think your kids will have such a much more enjoyable time after that.
I'm really glad to hear you say that, because I had already decided at Magma no one's going to compete until 2021. And for the girls who do compulsory fall, I actually said we're going to just switch over to Excel and do it later in the season. So that way at least they'll still get something during the competitive year. It seems like the consensus is definitely there. If anyone ever wants to chime in or input or rebuttal again, just please give me a wave of the hand so I don't forget anyone, because we do have a wonderful, panel here. I'm going to extrapolate on that question. I'm sorry, Gina.
No, it's okay. My only add to it, I agree with them both. And I just took some notes. Like Ellie said, you make different decisions when it's the day before the Olympics. If you broke your pinky finger, you're not going to die. It might affect you in life. If you have a spondy and it slipped and you can't feel your left foot, there's a bigger decision to be made in that from a safety perspective. So, there's no level 5 that's not going to get a college scholarship by participating in a sport 3 months on a different side of things. And unfortunately for gym owners, the tough truth is you have to say to them, I'm willing to lose 1% to 2% of my kids to protect the other 98%. And to say, I'm not going to have you bully me or push me into doing a season. I'll pay a coach on the side. I've heard that was this week. I'll send a coach with an athlete, and it's like, that's great, but that's not setting an example for what the gym should stand for, which is, I love my sport, but I love you more as a kid. And I want to make sure that you're healthy in the long run. The other thing is there is delayed onset reactions for so many injuries. And those that I treat most at the elite and national team level by far are stress fractures and musculotendinous junction issues like hamstrings on the butt bone and patellar tendon issues and Achilles issues on the heel, et cetera. Those, unfortunately, including bone stress injuries, sometimes don't show up for 6 months from when the ramp up of the stress was. And we've done some case studies of like pulling back and saying, when did you actually start ramping up? When did you start doing 2 extra days of plyo, et cetera? So the mistakes that people make now, like an ankle sprain, if your legs are too tired, you're going to find out by Tuesday, right? But the mistakes from a long-term injury perspective, coaches might not even see until October, November. And I'm scared in the fall for those that push for fall season, that not only are they going to ruin season, I could care less about that. I don't want them to ruin the athlete and make that an issue. So this, I don't feel it. It's not their thing. I think people need to really understand. You don't feel chronic fatigue syndrome. You don't feel it if you don't recover every day. You don't feel it if you don't stretch properly until weeks and months and cycles go by when the overuse catches up to you. So I'm seeing a big increase right now, our third week open. I have a feeling we're going to see a huge increase in October for those that aren't listening. That's where I think our 2 cycles are going to be. I think by February, people are going to learn because they're going to make mistakes and then they're going to be like, shoot, and reset. So those are my 2 cents. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Gina. What about you, Dr. Eldridge? What is your biggest concern for the returning athletes?
Well, I just want to say I'm kind of pumped about the whole quarantine thing. Like, it's been something that I've been pushing for, and if anybody has ever heard me speak before, I've been pushing for gymnastics off season for 10 years. So I'm loving the thought process on this, but I agree with, I caught a little bit of Dr. Hart's information, Gina's information, but yeah, I agree that this was a touch longer than what I wanted for the athletes. I was hoping for 3 to 4 weeks of an off season, not necessarily. Some of our athletes have been out for 8 and 9 weeks, and that's just too much deconditioning for the athlete, I think, for some type of training. But at the same time, I think the gyms that do it right, I'm so excited for them because they're going to see really, really cool things happen in the spring. Comes state and regional nationals next year, they're going to have some athletes that are doing things that they never even dreamed possible because their bodies don't have the stress that they've had in years past. This is the first time some athletes in gymnastics have ever had a break ever. So since they were 3 years old. So I think this is such a big thing, but coming back the right way is super important. And definitely, I think that's where the relationship between parent, athlete, and coach comes in. And it becomes really important, that communication level, the athlete maybe even rating their day, hey, 0 to 5, or their recovery 0 to 5. Hey, I'm feeling like a 3 today. I don't feel great, coach. And then they can kind of make those kind of micro adjustments before they get to what Gina was talking about into permanent injury. But that's kind of the same thing I've heard. There's a lot of people they're jumping right at it, and they're not taking that time to slowly build their athletes into it. And I think part of this is a learning curve because gymnastics has never done this before. I think you look at other sports like football somewhat, and the other sports that have an off season, they kind of know how to work their athletes back into it. This is a completely new thing for gymnastics. Hopefully not the last one, and hopefully we can learn from this. And the gyms that do it right, they see the amazing stuff that happens, and they can jump into it.
Josh, funny that you say that. I said to someone today, and this is true for Ellie, for Ian, not you, Josh, because I don't think you can do a back tuck, having not been a gymnast. Tell me if I'm wrong. I think Ian, Ellie, and I could probably do 10 back tucks in a row today if you put money on it. I think I could probably do 10 back tucks in a row for 10 days from now. But can I or should I? And I don't think it's a good idea. And I think these kids are going to be like, fulls are so easy. I'm working 2.5 punch fulls or whatever. It's not that you can't do it. I trust you. I think you're amazing. You're intelligent. I don't think that you've lost gymnastics, but you shouldn't. So I think that that's the hard part. When you're a level 5, you're so excited to do a back handspring. And when you're an elite, you think a layout's just dumb, right? So it's pulling them back psychologically to trust in this process. And that is, Robert Andrews and I talked a lot about that a couple weeks ago. That is what the hardest thing is. It's just like ACLs right at that time when they get strong enough physically, but the ACL isn't strong enough, and that re-injury period happens because they get excited and they think I could do it and I probably will be okay. And that's just not where we need to be. So,
and what you said, huge point too, I think that's really cool, is that all three of you having done gymnastics, me doing basketball, right? If I went to the court, it'd take me about 5 shots and I'd be able to hit 10 3-pointers in a row. Just like y'all would be able to go to the gym, mess around a little bit, and you'd be doing back tucks, maybe more. So I think too, the really cool point about what you brought up, Gina, is because that a lot of this stuff is just built in, either through learned, or they're laying down, different pathways in the brain. They're never forgetting these skills. So we don't have to jump right after them and beat the body up to try to get new skills or get the skills back really quick, because it's already built in. They've already cemented that into their brain. Because it just goes for you guys. Don't practice gymnastics every day, but you can do a back tuck. So that's the cool thing.
But they think they do have to do it every day. I mean, Ellie, it's just like when you're at a meet. I mean, what's the point of morning practice? Do you really have to do the routine for the 900th time? No, there are some kids that just need one more podium, one more, yes, I can do this, one more everything. And that's that muscle memory, which works in both ways. A, it's awesome it comes back. B, it's bad that it comes back so fast because it means that it leads to impatience because they know that they can do it. So they think that they should. Okay. I'll get, I think, hammered that down.
Just a little firsthand experience from this week, actually. So I'm starting to work out again. I have a 1.5-year-old. So for the last 1.5 years, my fitness has just declined because, I've been up twice a night and, all kinds of stuff. Right. And so I'm starting to get back into shape and moving and feeling pretty good now. I'm getting back into my running program and all that. And so I was over at a friend's house and their kid was doing a bridge kick over and cheese and dance. And like, oh, can you still do anything? And I was like, I've got one trick left. And so stood out there in the grass. I did a back tuck and, felt fine, right? The next day, my abs were so sore. And I was like, oh man, just one back tuck, are you kidding me? And it's the same thing. Like if you stick me on a trampoline, I could do some pretty crazy stuff, but then I can't walk for 3 weeks. And so, I just posted a video this week of me doing a double Arabian from 10 years ago, and one of my friends is like, oh, you can still do that, right? I was like, my brain says yes. And I might be able to get away with it once, or both Achilles would snap. I'm not really sure which one happened first. So yeah, absolutely. It's that reining him back. And I had a coach ask me, she's like, well, how do I bring him back slow enough, but not let them get bored? And I was like, I'm okay with letting them get bored for a couple of weeks. Let's make sure they're bored for a couple of weeks, and then they can start getting a little more excited.
We can do a little bit more of what Asia and Russia do, and we can have games of perfecting basics too. And I think that is key. Let's make a good hollow hold. Let's make a good vertical handstand. Let's see how many stick contests we can have, and change the game of gymnastics as opposed to skill mounting into perfection of basics, not creating perfectionism monsters, of course, but just rewarding them and challenging them personally to better yesterday. And I think that that's a good goal to have too.
Yeah, and then just to add in, so a fun fact, oops, sorry, I got a dog who's, of course, barking right as I go to turn on my mic there. Sorry, guys. Fun fact actually about me is I actually, after college gymnastics, went back to level 10. So at 23 years old, I decided I wanted to just have one more go at USAG JO program. I went back to level 10, actually started getting skills back. I used a lot of my athletic training background and sports medicine background to train so differently. And that's a lot of what I base off sort of my new return protocols from. And what's really interesting is I actually got new skills. I did not get injured. And I actually qualified and am ranked as one of the oldest level 10 Junior Olympic national qualifiers. So definitely taking that slow progression, focusing on injury prevention, making sure I listened to my PTs who gave me all my prevention before I even started practice. I had a routine that was 20 minutes in the beginning, 20 minutes in the end. I did less numbers. We always talk about continually repetition. But if we're doing the same thing over and over and over again, we're going to get injured. So I really changed habits, really changed the way that the traditional gymnastics was being taught. And it was very self-driven. Of course, you can say I was much stronger mentally. I had this, repertoire of skills from when I was little. But sort of I relate that sort of concept to a lot of my gymnasts that, taking your time, doing your prehab, preventing injuries is key. So.
Thank you. We're going to now go to some questions that we have from the audience. So I'm going to hand it over to Pat. If you have an answer, just raise your hand, or just unmic yourself. Thank you.
So one of the questions we had on the topic of injury prevention was, what are some simple movements or exercises that we can incorporate into either our daily warm-up or cool down to help prevent injury for our athletes? Let's start with Gina.
Great question. If you had 6 hours, we could tackle this, maybe 8. So body specific, yes. But here's, I guess my general advice would be, take your body, a gymnast body, and break down everything that you want to do prevention wise. You want to do shoulders, elbows, wrists, upper spine, lower spine, cervical, knee, ankle, etc. And if you have time, and God, if you have time for 2 a day, that would be great. Do 1 to 2 a day for everything, or make 1 to 2 a day a side station at each event. I am floored when I have people do time in, time out. So we have injured kids at gyms sitting around checking to see how much actual physical time kids are spending on equipment, and then what we call tertiary, which is just like side stations for vaults, etc. And it's like 14% of the time that they're in the gym that they're active. So side stations are fine. You don't need to have a huge gym. All you need is your body weight and a space on the floor or a wall. So I think the biggest part is to try to incorporate it in, and make sure that you're not doing all hamstrings or all quads or all of one body part. I think we find that a lot of coaches will train to either what they were taught to do as an athlete, or what they are really mad and have some PTSD about that they didn't get to do as an athlete. Like, oh my God, I tore my hamstring, and then all their kids have massive hamstrings and tendonitis because they do too much. Or I never did Achilles stuff, so now I'm going to do, all Achilles stuff. So you just have to make sure that it's weighted. Coaches don't like to plan things. They like to just show up and like 2 minutes beforehand and be like, I could throw a practice together. Well, I could throw a practice together too, but I sure as heck can't throw a micro and a macro cycle together without it being on paper. So work your way backwards from your 4-week, your 6-week, whatever it is, and make sure that you're doing a little bit of everything. It's as simple as a whiteboard and writing things out. And all of us on this call have tons of stuff on online resources for videos for good prevention. There isn't really one thing because there's no one master master at anything. We all have very different approaches to it, but we get to it the same way, which is to prevent injuries from happening in the first place. You treat the prehab the way that we are reacting by making something stronger after it's injured, and you just flip it to the forefront. So grab a whiteboard, pick your body parts, and map it out. That would be what I would say.
Thanks, Gina. Let's go to Josh next.
Yeah, so for injury prevention, the one that I really like to do personally, and that I like to teach all of my gymnasts, all of my soldiers, all of my athletes, anybody that I'm working with, the first thing I teach them how to do is to breathe diaphragmatically. So that's the first thing that I like to work with all of my athletes on, because I think it's such a big deal that so many people overlook as far as, excuse me, there's something else going in my headphones. So yeah, I just think it's something that people overlook, and it's one of the things that will improve core control, because a lot of thought is that if you can't control diaphragm, you can't control the core, and core is the body's ability to control individual spinal joints, thus protecting the central nervous system, allowing the body to do better and more and better work. So I think if we can control that breathing, and then you can add in, as you go, you can add in bracing and things like that for bigger skills. But I think that just teaching athletes to diaphragmatically breathe will not only help them with their movement, their flexibility, their mobility, and also their recovery. So that's the first thing that I like to teach them how to do. And I think it's a big step in the recovery process and movement process. So if I had to pick one thing to teach every athlete in the world, that would be it, for prevention and for performance.
Thanks, Josh. I'm always amazed by how many kids have no idea how to breathe through their diaphragm. Let's go to Ian next.
All right. Yeah. So, like they said, there's no way you could pick like one single thing, especially before practice. I like prehab after practice as kind of like a semi cool down kind of type time. So if we're talking about a warm up to prevent injury, what I would say would be make sure your warm up is a dynamic warm up. And the reason why you say that is because static stretching or static type warm ups and that general stretch that's static, that actually decreases power for a little bit of time. And so if you're expecting them to do static stretching and then jump up and go do something, you're risking some injury because they don't have as much power as they think they do. A simple test, and you can try this at home, is sit down in a pike with your back up against the wall, take a medicine ball, throw it from your chest as far as you can, and then have somebody bring it back to you, then do a tricep stretch for 30 seconds to a minute on each side, hold it on each side, then take that same medicine ball, throw it again, and mark it, and you're going to realize that you can't throw it quite as far at that time. And so it's because your muscles lose power when you do a static stretch. So I would say dynamic stretching or dynamic warm-ups in the beginning, 15 minutes, and then get on with your practice.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's hear from Ellie now.
Awesome. I agree with everyone, so it's hard to pick that one exercise. What I'm commonly focusing on prior to getting any of my gymnasts cleared and giving them the full clearance to go back is looking at your landing mechanics, and then also making sure your splits that you have square hips. So that's sort of two of my big things that I focus on. So it's not really one exercise that we're talking about, but focusing on those two different skills. If you can square your hips, you'll help prevent back injuries, hip injuries, hamstring, even ankle. If you can land properly, same kind of thing, shoulder, back, hips, knees, ankles. You can really prevent those injuries if you can safely land and then correctly perform a split. Again, with hips square, not those sort of unsquare hips that I see so many of those gymnasts coming in. So I would say if coaches could focus on those two, and there are tons of exercises and tons of great websites that will actually give you a breakdown of how to focus on that. But if we're really trying to pick kind of things that we can do, those are my top two that I would say to focus on.
Thanks, Ellie. So our next question, which is actually kind of branching off what Ian was just discussing, is when should you, and this covers three different things, when should you foam roll, dynamic stretch, and passive stretch? so that it is most helpful or most effective? Does anyone want to start with this one? Ian?
Yeah, sure. Why not? So foam roll, dynamic stretch, and passive stretch. Is that what you said?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. So dynamic stretch always in the beginning, like I just talked about. Passive stretch. So honestly, I just don't use passive static stretching often at all. If I use it, it's to basically get the muscle used to being stretched, because you don't actually gain range of motion by doing static stretching. You can, but you got to sit in a split for 30 minutes with weight on your back. And, it's static stretching is really difficult to gain range of motion through. And it takes just a ton of time, and it's very cumbersome. And so if static stretching does something, what it does is just gets the body used to being in that position. And so if you need a 180 switch leap, well, your body has to be comfortable at 180 degrees. And so it's not a bad idea to sit in a split to get comfortable in that position. But if you're actually trying to gain range of motion, I think eccentrics and progressive type stretching is what gains that range of motion like you want. And then with foam rolling, there's a lot of mixed reviews on foam rolling. I like foam rolling as more of a relaxation recovery type tool. So if they're super sore, beginning of the day is just fine. Beginning of the practice is just fine. If they've had a really tough conditioning circuit that they just went through, right after that, foam roll just to get everything relaxed and loosened back up. That foam rolling, again, it takes a lot of force to change a muscle by doing a roller type movement. I was listening to a podcast with some weightlifters, and they've been through the research, and foam rolling, if you really want to affect change in the muscle, foam rolling just isn't going to do it. And so they had this 140 pound something like pinwheel, basically a rolling pin, and they would set it on top of their quads and roll it back and forth, and he named it the ex-wife. And
that's Donnie Thompson. Is that who it was?
Is that who it was? I heard it on John Russell's podcast, I believe.
Oh yes, yeah, Donnie Thompson. He does it. He calls it body tempering.
Yeah, body tempering. Yeah, and so that probably does affect some sort of change by putting that kind of weight on you. But foam rolling, I like it as just relaxation.
Great, thank you.
Well,
Let's go to Gina next.
Foam rolling for me is a matter of getting blood flow into a muscle, so that what you do immediately after it can be helped or just be bigger. So if you have sore calves and you're going to dynamically do heel bounces, or you're going to start doing jumps, doing that coming right out of the car is really difficult, especially in Chicago. It's cold, and nobody puts their heat on in the car like we always ask them to do, hot packs and everything else. So we often use foam rolling as a means to just increase lymphatic and local blood flow, which many research studies have shown will help for power production anywhere between 6 and 8%, and flexibility between 10 and 12%. So it's not that the foam rolling makes you more flexible. Let me be very clear. It's that the precursor of doing some sort of pressure to the muscle, it can be thumbs and lotion, it could be knuckles, it could be, whatever, just will essentially trigger that neurosystem. Just like Ian had said, you want to get a kid into a switch leap. And I always say this in my courses, and the quiz at the end is so funny because I have them take the same quiz in the beginning, and they're like, God, I should have known that. A switch leap injury usually doesn't happen because the kids can't do their splits. It happens because the dynamic aspect of the movement has not been warmed up properly, or there's some sort of neuromuscular guarding, whether it's the brain telling the muscle, don't go there yet, whether you haven't done kicks and some prep work to it. But most of the time, when relaxed in a controlled environment, the kids can get down to the range of motion. So I think that the dynamic flexibility aspect of things is absolutely important. No static stretching before practice, static stretch before events, if you want to prove to yourself that your legs can go where they need to go for your Tkachev split or for a switch leap or whatever it is. We use rolling at the end as well, just to flush. But to be honest with you, it's much better 2 to 3 hours after, because flushing the minute that you end practice, nothing has been actually built up yet. So gyms having rollers for the beginning is great. Kids having them at home before bed is better. So there you go.
Awesome. Thank you. Ellie?
Yeah, sure. Perfect. Just to add in a little bit as well. So I actually cover right now as part of USAG's medical staff. And so to go to Gina's point about rolling, we actually have an athlete recovery center usually after sort of practices have been happening. And just to Gina's point, it's not that exact second, it's a couple hours later that we see the athletes and help treat them and recover. And I know she also mentioned as well, trying to get everybody to heat beforehand to also kind of help get you ready for the workout, get you warmed up. That would be fantastic. I sort of relate it to, and Ian, you can jump in as well, as kind of from the college athlete perspective, right? You can go see your athletic trainers, heat, massage, get some East in before you get started, do your prehab, then go to practice, ice afterward, do cold whirlpool, cold tub later in the day, then do your foam rolling, all those different things. So kind of having that program in place could be very helpful overall. I think also we think that there's sort of, what's the exact answer? What's the perfect answer? And I think we need to take every gymnast individually to see which stretches and which sort of focus works best for them, because there's traditionally been that one size fits all. And I think we're starting to see now with research and kind of coaches getting more involved, more medical providers getting involved, that really should be making individualized plans rather than kind of group plans.
Thanks, Ellie. John, did you want to go?
Yeah. So I'm going to move on to the next question. This is from John Wochuk. When they go to rehab or the rehabilitating based on injuries or soreness or anything, what do you think of the use of amica oil or gels or any other kind of chemicals to reduce swelling alongside ice? And also, what is your general opinion on icing, ice buckets, and ice therapy? Dr. Joshua Eldridge? Unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's a good question. Interesting question. So I'm not an expert on the gels that he's referring to. So I'm not even going to go there because that doesn't fall within my wheelhouse. So I will touch on icing as far as recovery and when to use ice for recovery. I think that it falls down the scale of importance of recovery as not really the most important things. And I think that Gina and Ellie kind of hit on some of and Ian even hit on some of the recovery things, but our most important portion of recovery is nutrition and rest, sleep. So if we're not doing those two things, icing, if you're not getting a good quality post-workout meal and 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night it's kind of a waste of time, so to speak. So I think it can be a good tool once you've maximized those things before. And I think probably before I'd ice, I'd use dynamic compression, like a Normatec before I'd ice somebody. So if you're doing that, if you're doing your nutrition and your sleep, and you're using a Normatec or you're using some kind of static compression, and you're doing your mobility routine that Gina or Ellie or Ian has set up for you, and then you're doing what would come before ice, you're doing your yoga the next day, and you're still not recovering, then I'd look at doing like a cold water soak at 50 to 54 degrees. The only time I'd use ice personally is if inflammation has gotten out of control. And I think that something like that for a young athlete, ice can be great for pain relief. So that's the other time I use it, like with my Seavers protocol, I use cold water soaks. But that's for me, just when I look at ice, it's there for excessive inflammation. I would use it for recovery, but it would have to be way down. It's not the first thing I'd go to.
Thank you. Ian, I'd love to hear your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree there. There's a difference between icing for an injury versus icing for recovery. And like you said, unless inflammation's out of control, I usually don't use ice. And if they sprain their ankle and it's a little bruise, it's a little bit puffy, I'm not going to worry about it. But if they sprain their ankle and all of a sudden it just looks like a volleyball on the bottom of their leg, all right, let's get some ice on it possibly. It's a little out of control. So that's when I kind of use ice for injury, but ice for recovery. Yeah, he hit it right on the head. That was probably one of the worst experiences of my life, would be icing for recovery. Because I did it in college. And so, like I said, I went to Springfield College in Massachusetts. And so after gym, I'd go sit in that 50 to 54 degree whirlpool. And, it's different. And like, if you just sit in an ice tub, that's one thing, because your body kind of warms up the water around you and you go, oh, okay, I can handle this. A whirlpool though is a whole nother game, because man, that water's just cycling the whole time. You're just going, oh, this is so cold, right? And then, so being in Massachusetts, what I do, I hop out of the whirlpool. I don't go straight to the dorm because the dining hall is about to close. So I go to the dining hall. It's 20 degrees, outside, and I'm shivering as I'm walking through the snow, and I'm sitting there trying to eat my dinner. Can't hold my spoon steady, and and then finally, like 2 hours later, I'm in the shower, finally warming up again, and I stopped shivering. That was probably counterproductive. So, because I sat there and I was just tense for like an hour afterward. But icing for recovery does help. There's some good research behind that. I'm not a huge fan of like that liquid nitrogen or that nitrogen gas cold water or that cold recovery stuff, simply because I think it's kind of risky. I haven't looked a lot into it, but that's really, really cold. It gets down to, what is it, like negative 100 and something or something like that, right? 300. Yeah. So it's crazy cold, and if there's just a leak in that bag or whatever it is, it's bad news. So yeah, I like that, but I'm with you, Josh. I like lots of other things for recovery. But yeah, if you need just that one extra thing, if you're just beating yourself to pieces and need a little bit extra recovery, rest and do some cold water.
Okay. Thank you so much,
Oh,
Ian.
and the gels. You had a thing about the gels, right?
Yes, if you know anything about the gels.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly the brands or the names that you're using, but with gels, it's a lot of times it's a good distraction from pain, but it's not necessarily going to change anything, because in order to actually push something through the skin to cause an effect is really difficult, because you've got water layers, but also you've got fat layers, and to send something through both of those layers is really difficult. So you either have to have something hydrophilic or hydrophobic. Either it likes water or it doesn't like water. And then, you just kind of go, maybe, maybe not. But if the placebo effect works, I'm okay with it, right? If icy hot makes your back feel good, but you're also doing other things to help you, yeah, I'm fine with it, right? So that's kind of my 2 cents on topical stuff.
Thank you, Ian. I'm going to kind of segue into the next question, unless you want to talk a little bit more about ice.
John,
Gina?
I'm gonna, yeah,
Okay, I was coming to you.
no, it's real quick. This will be like 30 seconds. I just did a incredibly controversial full over 1 hour presentation that's on my YouTube channel on how much I hate ice and how I've owned the same 6 ice packs for 12 years. And if I ever meet a medical practitioner who says they use ice, I will never refer to you again. And if I meet a coach that says they use ice, I will make it my job for free to sit and argue with you like it's a political debate on how it is the most useless thing in the world. Now, having said that, if you have, Josh, okay, military arterial compression, some sort of compartment syndrome, stick your body in ice. If you just got paralyzed, NFL just has it, right? Cooling you down helps with the swelling, makes the bones not shift. I mean, I'm very skimming over this, but every major medical thing in the world is based on healing, and it's based on blood flow. So if it's Aunt Fanny and her foot hurts because she has a wedding to go to, she can ice it because she won't feel pain, but she is not going to get better faster. So if full recovery, tissue healing, proliferation, arterial flow, pH levels of the local system are what you need, it's heat and ice, or cryo, which is actually considered a heating modality. We own a unit and it's busy like hotcakes. And I believe in the research to it because of the flushing. I don't know that it does as much as it says it does, but I think that it does. It's all about blood flow. And people say that all the time. If you're on an ankle sprain, I want you to walk on it. And yes, I'm going to touch it. And yes, I'm going to move it. And yes, we're going to get it hot. And they're like, no, it's going to make it more swollen. And I said, unless you're swimsuit modeling tomorrow, I don't care what it looks like. I want healing. And icing prevents healing. So no ice. Zippo.
What about like the arnica oils for the ankles or topicals like CBD? How do you feel about that, Gina?
Yeah. So the basic, there are 3 basic types of topicals, and I have a good understanding of topicals simply just because of traveling so much. I get exposed to chiropractors and doctors and PAs and nurses. So you have a topical that takes nerve pain away, like a gabapentin or something like that. Do they work? Kind of, but again, nerve pain is usually in your brain, so probably not. It's more passive. Then you have the topicals that do vasodilation, supposedly, which are everything from arnicus to Voltaren to everything else. And again, to Ian's point, you either have done the research on if it's absorbing well or not, or we do what we did with iontophoresis about 27 years ago, which is figure out that sticking people on the electric and zapping all of it into their system in 20 minutes doesn't work, because there is a maximum tissue uptake load, an MTIL, that there is no possible way that tissue can absorb more than that in a specific amount of time, which is why you can't just put Voltaren on one time a day in a vat. You have to put it on multiple times a day, supposedly, because they've done research to say that there's tissue absorption. So I think that from a vasodilation perspective, I'm all over it, because it means more blood flow comes, which will inherently increase healing. To Ian's point on a topical, something even as simple as an icy hot, it is not a fix for anything. They need to see one of somebody like us, right? However, if it prevents guarding and you put it on your hamstring and they're not ready to do switch sleeps and it dumbs it down and they hurt themselves more, bad idea. But if it prevents guarding to a point where like their back isn't so stiff, so their arch is actually not based on a hinge theory situation, and it allows them to do more in a safe manner, sometimes the mind game thing I'm okay with. But as Ian said, it has to be under supervision of someone like Ellie, Josh, Ian, or I, or someone that understands the reasoning behind it. Don't take Advil and go do things, because it's just going to make them worse. Now, CBDs, that's interesting. My experience with it is this: there are only 2 or 3 companies in the US right now that are approved through all of the methods that like USOC or USADA would have, where it's 0.000%, and it's not essentially pot that's been pulled out, but it's actually independently grown. So it's it cannot have marijuana in it, if you will. And the neuro characteristics of CBD oil are the most researched and the most promising, in that it does prevent guarding. It is helping with anxiety. It's helping with muscle relaxation. To Josh's point, if it helps you sleep, sleep will help you recover much more than a PT session or a massage ever will. You just need to get down. Some of the CBDs are helping with gut inflammation, and the gut is where leaky gut syndrome and all this inflammatory stuff, it's just wreaks havoc on someone that's going through inflammatory issues, tendinitis, et cetera. So I believe in some of them, and there are very few companies that do it well. JC Phelps, obviously Olympian and good friend of mine, works with a company, and she's massively educated on the side effects of it. And again, what we're finding by looking into it is that the neuro side of it is the most promising.
Thank you, Gina. We're going to move along to our next topic, a big one, to tape or not to tape. And so many gyms, we see even little kids taping their ankles. You know, we have the kinesio type tapes, you know, oh, my ankle hurts, coach. Well, let's just tape and keep tumbling. Elspeth, do you mind addressing that?
Yeah, of course. Great question. So I think the first thing we need to know is, why are you taping? So that's the first step. So if there has been an injury and you acutely, you've been cleared to go back, but you need to progress back maybe a little quicker than perhaps your tendons and ligaments can react or heal from, then I think taping would be okay for a short period of time. Again, this is that circumstance that we are, you know, we've cleared you, we said it's safe to participate, the risk is low, but you're still recovering, and this is an aid or a help or a band-aid to get you back. I think it's okay to tape. What I don't want, though, and what I don't encourage my gymnasts to do, is to tape or brace for significant periods of time. I think everyone will agree that we want our own bodies to develop the muscles, develop the proprioception, so knowing where you are in space, being able to do that on your own versus using a brace. I actually just did a study, the results will be coming out soon, on wrist guards, which is a hot topic. We took about 20 different gymnasts, put them in tiger paws, the black skid wrist guards, and then no wrist guards at all, and had them do back handsprings, and looked at a 3D analysis as well as the forces and impact. And to no surprise, the wrist guard did decrease your wrist extension. However, it increased your moment. And increased moments actually mean increased forces and potentially increased injury. So we actually don't want to be wearing taping and bracing for significant periods of time, because it could actually lead to more injury later on.
Thank you, Elspeth. Joshua, your opinion also on taping and, of course, supplemental bracing like the tiger paws, you know, kinesio tape, you know, long-term, short-term. Thank you.
Yeah, I think Ellie hit it out of the park there. I don't know if there's a ton more to add to that than what she said. I think athletes though tend to rely on taping as a mental aid, probably more than a physical aid, or they never actually went to see one of these experts to come up with a proper routine, a physical therapy routine to return back to proper play. So a lot of them are just skipping over that whole point, and so they probably have instability at whatever joint that they've injured, and so their brain is telling them, hey, something's wrong, or central nervous system is telling them something's wrong with that joint, like let's stabilize this joint so that we don't hurt ourselves. And so instead of actually going back and looking at the root problem and figuring out what it is, then they're taping it, especially with like a white athletic tape, which probably isn't doing a ton for them except for mentally after a few minutes. And so that's it. I do like KT tape in certain situations, but again, it can be a good neurological feedback kind of tool rather than a bracing mechanism. And that's great to hear about. As far as tiger paws, that was great to hear about Ellie's research. So that's really neat because I get that question all the time. So I've never really known what to say from a scientific point of view because we've never had really a ton of great information on that. So that's fantastic to hear. And I would imagine if you're limiting extension at the wrist, then you still have to get that extension from somewhere. So I would imagine also that you would probably look at potential injuries at the elbow or shoulder or even lumbar spine. I don't know. Do you have something to say to that?
I was going to add it. Yeah. So our first part of the study is the wrist. Next part is looking at what happens to the elbow. After that is shoulder and then back. So you essentially led my next few studies out of it.
So Ellie, look at the wrist presentation I did and how much I talked about like verticality of shoulder and elbow things and the whole hinge theory. And we always talk about how the wrist is important to spine injury. And people look at me like I'm blowing their mind. And I'm like, yeah, but when you do a back handspring, your point of impact and verticality matters so much. So I'm so excited you're doing this too. It's great.
Ian, did you have any comments on taping and supports?
Yeah, well, learn from me because I did it the exact wrong way. So I taped my ankle for 6 years, like every day at practice for 6 years. And so as a result, I don't have a lot of long-term issues anymore. I thought maybe I was going to have some originally. I do have a bone in my foot that's actually got like a big old callus on it from where I just abused that ankle over and over and over again. So some little evidence for you. So I actually taped my wrist. Every once in a while my wrist would flare up, and I would usually tape my wrist anyway, but on bad days, I would tape my wrist and then I'd put a wrist brace on top of it. I would put like a skid on top of it. And so I basically had a cast on my arm. And so now, if you watch this, so that is what I have. So that's my extension actively. And so everybody's going, oh man, right now passively it gets back there, but actively that's it. Now I've been working on this wrist, so it's a little higher. I've been working on it recently, but learn from me, right? If you constantly use that, then your body goes, oh yeah, I don't need all that stuff, right? If you're going to do that for me, then I'm not going to need it anymore, and I'll use that somewhere else. And I've recently kind of coined the term tiger paw wrist because I'm seeing these gymnasts that they they'll show me their wrist extension and it stops at like 60 or 70 degrees. And that's it, right? And I'm like, that looks the exact angle of where a tiger paw stops you, right? And now I would love to know, especially from Ellie, since you're doing this, what about like the Easy Pro brace that has the palm pad on it? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so great question. So I had already started the study and was only able to use the 2 bracing conditions. So I would love to have put that one in. But I think that one is a good idea, right? So theoretically, the idea behind the Easy Wrap is to have that little piece on your palm to kind of create an arch, if you will, to have the absorption of a force. So similar to having an insert in your shoe, like a sneaker, for example, you have a good arch support. That was the idea behind it. And actually the thought process of the tiger paw cross, some people say, could that lift it? I don't think it quite gives that support there. I would say that what I try to think about is how is that brace slightly different? So if I'm now elevating a part of your hands, I'm still putting different forces on different areas of your wrist. So I worry by lifting up, Are you then putting more force on the ulnar growth plate instead of the radial growth plate? And then you're potentially increasing more what we call ulnar positive variance when that ulnar bone continues growing, which later in life and at that time is also very bad because you want to have the force more on your distal radius bone. So I sort of worry by changing that mechanic, what are you doing to the rest of your body? And with sort of Gina and Josh explaining as well, what's happening the rest of your body. So if you've elevated that section, what are you doing differently? So I think kind of looking at full mechanics of how much wrist range of motion you actually have, shoulder, hip, everything, kind of looking at the full body to figure out what exactly can we do to help you be a healthier gymnast overall.
So Ellie, can you see, can everyone see my little drawing, right?
Yep.
This is sometimes how I lecture and teach, which my husband thinks is hilarious, right? So the bottom one is a 90-degree angle. The second one breaks up 90 into two 45s, which is still 90, but in two different places. And the top one is a rounded area, right? So the bottom one essentially, and you could even go so much as to say that is what your wrist looks like on a soft floor, because you actually have up to 118 degrees of wrist extension when you're tumbling, right? So you get 90 degrees, you get more, you get whatever. So whatever it is that's there is displacing the forces. So ulnar TFCC injuries are kind of my jam. And that is just, is it pushing you to one side or not? If you don't have the shoulder flexibility, where are you? So again, when people ask a question about, is this good or is this bad? The individualized program, Ellie, like you said, you got to look at people. I mean, I do telehealth all the time, and I'm like, there is, what's your back look like? What's your shoulder look like? And then is your wrist insufficiency that big of a deal? Holy cow, it's a huge deal, because your shoulders are also bad. We're in trouble, right? Now we have a spondy in the making. So I think, yeah, and for the taping thing, Josh, to your point, what's stronger, God plus gravity in landing or tape for plantar fasciitis, right? You can't make a plantar fascia out of kinesio tape that you can go like this with. And people are like, oh, I feel the support. No, you don't. You feel no support. You feel the activation part of it and the education component that medical professionals have to do for coaches, athletes, and parents is tell them why it's beneficial. I don't mind putting K-tape on a hamstring if they're coming back from an ish-tube issue or an avulsive injury or something as a reminder, but they cannot rely on it as support, because then there's that proprioception issue. And that is, I mean, if I can pull tape, landing a triple full is not going to support my plantar fascia. So I don't care how you tape it. And athletic tape is what, 8-9 minutes, the research says, and it loses 25 to 30% of its tensile force. So for 9 minutes, you're good to go.
Could I say something real quick, John, going back to what Ian said, because Ian had a great point, and I don't know if Ian picked up his point, but he said that he had like a Taylor dome beak, I think is kind of what we kind of refer to it as. But a lot of the athletes, and this goes back to kind of where we started from at the beginning, was so many of our athletes are training the wrong way, and they're doing so much pressure on their joints that they're creating this dysfunctional, at 16, 17, 18, they have arthritic type processes in joints because of they're overdoing it, or they're landing short so many times because they never learned a skill properly, that now they're having to tape to allow their foot to move through. And I'm just using ankle in this example, but they're having to tape in order to allow their body to move the way that it should. And I had a lot of the athletes that would put they'd get like a foam, almost like a metal piece wrapped in foam that they would put there on the anterior part of the ankle to allow gapping, to allow dorsiflexion of their ankle. And that was because of that Taylor beak that they'd have that didn't allow them to dorsiflex without pain. So they had to tape to prevent that.
But if they saw Ian and I for proper manual therapy and did joint mobilization to restore kinematics, they wouldn't need it. It is true that their ankle does need that pressure, but it needs to happen naturally through the kinematic process, which is why landings and using your glutes and literally working on positioning is so important.
That's right. Yeah, the only physical therapy I've ever had is what I did on myself. I never actually had any formal physical therapy because I was like, I was the total old school, just work my what off and just push through. And I'm pretty sure I had a concussion at one point in time. I just kind of set down the rest of practice, and I was back in it the next day. Like terrible things, right, that I did to my body. And so that's a big reason why I do what I do.
All right. I totally agree with you, Ian, because I'm old school too. You know, you cut yourself, you knock yourself out, you just put some ice on your head, take an aspirin and go back to work. We have one more question from Pat, and then I'll ask for some closing comments.
So the question is on nutrition, which we haven't really touched on yet. It's what are some of the best intra-workout snacks for athletes during long practices that are quick and easy but healthy?
Yes, I'll jump in and do this one. So I love talking about nutrition. And so one of the things that we got to look at is what's easy for the athlete. So first of all, if we're looking at just taking in food during practice and expecting that to be enough, then we've kind of missed the point. So I've got something I call the roadmap to success. So we got to make sure that our athletes are eating throughout the day. So they've got to make sure that they're putting that food, quality food, right, in their body throughout the day to prepare for practice. Once they get to practice, then one of the best and most easy things that we want our athletes to eat is fruit, because fruit gives that quick shot of glycogen to the muscle and allows them to be able to perform at their fullest. Because gymnasts, the cool thing about gymnasts is that they're not able to access any stored fat or very minimal stored fat or stored tissue in order to provide energy. They're only using what's readily available and what they take into their bodies before practice and during practice. So utilizing fruit, and you don't have to have like a set time for, I know a lot of gyms, they're like, hey, we don't have time to take a 15-minute break for our kids to have a snack, and that's perfectly fine. But if the athletes have access to some type of fruit like grapes, I know at Dave Tilley's gym, one of the things they do is they have grapes, and same thing out at REG out in California. They've got a fruit platter just sitting out on the counter. And so now, of course, you want to go wash your hands really good for 20 seconds. And then, you go over the fruit tray and you just pop a couple things in your mouth and you keep going. And that's what we want to kind of do throughout practice in order to keep that sugar level up throughout the blood and in the muscle. And we're always to access that really good energy that comes from simple sugars without getting it from junk food. So we don't want to be taking in junk food during practice. That's one of the worst things we can do. The other thing that we can do is play around with our hydration a little bit. So when can we add in like a carbohydrate drink? Now, I'm not a big fan of Gatorade, but all the studies have been done on Gatorade, and so it's at 6% carbohydrates. And so if you can mimic that by doing half water and half juice, or you could do a quarter juice, 3/4 water, something of that nature, that whatever you kind of test out with your own body. It's an individual thing, how much sugar you can take in with a carbohydrate drink, and you can sip from that throughout practice as well. And that's a great way to get quick sugar into the body, but it's not taking in a lot of processed food. So taking in that sugar throughout practice is really important, but in the right form, not through junk food, through really quality. We don't want to, if you're going more than an hour and a half, then we got to start taking in those carbohydrates. And probably at about that hour mark, or maybe even a little bit before, is when we need to start taking that in, because your pre-workout snack should really cover that first hour of practice, but they're going to quickly start decreasing in energy that they have in their muscles, and we got to start bumping that back up for our athletes. So, and then of course we're doing our post-workout meal, which is one of the most important things to do, followed by sleep, which is how we start to store glycogen for the next day's practice. So it's not just thinking about nutrition during practice is important, because it's kind of like that icing on the cake, but that is what it is it's the icing on the cake. A lot of these processes are completed before practice and right after practice and throughout the day, just like mobility. All these things, we got to think about that as an athlete. How are we going to prepare them for practice throughout the day, not just during? So I hope that helps.
Yes.
And what I heard is that we can have just the icing off a cake during practice. That's what I heard.
Which is what happens most of the time.
Sorry.
I think it's, Josh, and I'm sure this drives you nuts too, but with all the diet fads out there right now with keto diet and paleo and all these, parents kind of throw things out. I think that the simple science behind it, and I love how you explain things, I always have, and that, is that carbs give you energy, right? And fats could give you energy if you are a fat burning person, right? And if that's how your system is set. So these people that do keto and paleo and everything else and deprive themselves of carbs, they've changed their system. You can't do that by just giving somebody fat before practice and then expecting their body to go to that. So you also can't go on a hike and pack a sandwich. You have to think about like day 2 and 3, and that's that glycogen store the next day. And you have to have pre-packed your body with things that it will go to after its immediate carb source is pulled. I've done consultations at gyms where we're talking about injuries and fatigue and people landing low. Well, 3.5 hours into a practice, you're landing, whether you're a level 5 landing low on a back tuck or an elite landing low on a double layout, you cannot think jump higher if you don't have the ability to have the energy source to produce the power. And 15 more minutes of practice and not taking a break to allow the kids in the middle, and again, 5 minutes here and there, but like a good chunk in the middle to allow them to replenish that, is essentially asking for injuries to the kids, because they're thinking that they're going to jump as high. They're thinking that their set's going to get them X so they can flip Y, and they're not able to produce it, which makes them frustrated and anxious. Anxiety makes performance go down, and it is just all kinds of levels that so much can be related to just having the ability to have the power source in your system. And Josh, we can follow up with this, John, with a whole bunch of tags and links to things, but there's so much research on hydration and how it takes a good 4 to 5 days to really build up your body's understanding of hydration. You can't just like drink water at 10 for a practice at 12 and expect your cells to be full. And hydration has a huge component to fatigue, but also just absorption of nutrition.
Thank you so much, Gina. I honestly feel we need a part 2 because there were some other questions that we couldn't get to. And I'm sure, like you said, it really is a wealth of information. And it's unfortunate that a lot of coaches really don't look to that prevention side and that rehabilitation side. And, you know, we've seen so many fantastic, world-class even athletes who have gotten injured or rushed too much, or, you know, little things that they said, oh, I wish I had done this or that. And then you don't see in the bigger picture the tens of thousands of athletes that this truly affects. So as we go to our closing comments, try to address what you would like to say to the audience. And also, if there's anything you want to say specifically to either the coach, the athlete, or the parent, you know, things to look out for, things you recommend, and things you'd like to say. I'd like to start with Elspeth. Ellie?
Sure, yeah. So thank you again, John and Pat, for putting this together. You guys are excellent. These are the resources that we need for our coaches. So thank you so much for putting this together. I would say my most pressing issue that I would, or sort of message I would try to get out to coaches is, you know, individualized plans. So having that not one size fits all, but really making sure that we take each individual athlete and making sure that we're checking in from them from a physical standpoint, emotional standpoint, nutrition standpoint, and really having that holistic and whole team approach is what every gymnast, coach, and parent definitely needs to get by in the sport. Also, I'll just add in, I'm in Boston, Massachusetts. That's where my practice is. So if anyone's in the area, feel free to reach out to me. The easiest way to get me is probably my email address, which is gymnasticsmedicine@gmail.com. So the word gymnasticsmedicine@gmail.com. Or you can find me on social media, Instagram, Facebook, for under Elspeth Hart.
Thanks so much, Ellie. Ian?
All right.
Final words.
Sorry to steal the show here. I had to bring in my buddy. He was crying, so he wanted up here with me. So brought him in. So this is Isaiah. This is my son. You know, I think my biggest thing that I want to tell coaches is we have to plan. And like Gina said earlier, you know, coaches are really bad at planning. They're really good at last minute, right? There's so many coaches out there that are procrastinators. And I was one of them, right? And it's because a lot of us have been doing this for so long that we know exactly what to do, or at least we think we do, right? We know exactly what needs to happen that day. But sometimes we forget, you know, well, our gymnast has something that they need to do in 5 years from now. And yes, this season is important, but 5 years from now, that season is probably even more important. And so I think definitely planning is the biggest thing, and making sure that your plan reflects what your gymnast goals are, you know. And then the last couple things is, prehab is awesome. Okay. So if you're looking at taking your club to the next level, do some prehab, right? And all around prehab is fine, right? If you have your whole team working shoulders and ankles and knee, that's fine, right? But if you really want that top-notch next level, it's individualized programs like what Ellie was saying earlier. Prehab is great, but not every kid needs ankle prehab. Not every kid needs their shoulders worked on. Now, a lot of them do, right? But probably not every single one of them. And so something that I do with the gyms that I work with is I take kids through a little assessment that I have, and I say, all right, what's tight that needs to be stretched, what's weak that needs to be strengthened, and let's figure out exactly what this kid needs for the next 2 or 3 months to work on, and then let's reassess and let's do something else. They've got that under control. Now, what's next, right? And so I think that's kind of the 2 big things is plan. And if you really want that next level top-notch stuff, then let's make sure that you're doing those individualized plans for each kid. And if you're looking at finding stuff on me, just go to Facebook. The Gymnastics Doc is the Facebook group that I have that's growing like crazy, which has been a lot of fun. It's been going on for like less than a year, and it's got like 3,200 people in it, which just blows me away. Extremely humbled by all the good stuff that I've gotten from people and all the compliments and things. So it's been fun. And then if you want to email me, it's just thegymdoc@elevate-sp.com. So elevate-sp as in sportsperformance.com.
Thank you so much, Ian. Josh, if you don't mind, final comments?
Yep. So the way that I think about the athlete is I call it the athlete pyramid. So we've got to make sure that we put the right things in the right order, or we're going to automatically have injury. So at the bottom of my pyramid, I have nutrition and hydration, followed by rest and recovery, which is where I put sleep. On top of that, I put proper movement. Then I put strength. And then up top, I put skills. So if we're taking that skills and we're putting it down at bottom, and we're making skills the most important thing for an athlete, then there's only one thing that can happen, because that pyramid's going to get shaky and it's going to fall over. And so that represents injury. So my what I try to really get out to coaches and to athletes and to parents is that just put that pyramid in the right order. And when you get that pyramid in the right order, and that goes with what Ian was saying, that pyramid is individualized. You can't have proper movement. For me, is going to look a lot different as a basketball player than it is for Ian as a gymnast. So if we can put it in the right order, then we're going to see a lot of success for our athletes. But we got to get that base down first, which is nutrition and hydration, rest and recovery. So if we can really get that solid for gymnasts, and we can get our coaches thinking about, hey, more is not always better. And that, as Dr. Sands said, sometimes it can take up to 2 weeks to recover from a hard practice. So if it takes that long to recover from a practice, then we got to be thinking about that with your planning that Ian talked about and Ellie talked about, to think about, hey, when I give a lot to my athlete, it's going to take a while for them to recover. And that just because, I'm going to do another Dr. Sands comment, but just because they're pliable doesn't give us the right to beat on them, right? Just because they can bend doesn't mean that we can keep bending on them until they break. So let's just think about the athlete as a person, and we build that proper pyramid, and they're going to be amazing athletes, and they're going to be able to do gymnastics when they're 23 and 24. And I would love to see more adult gymnastics in the future of the sport, because I think that's where you turn into pro leagues and you actually get legit money into the sport. And then all of a sudden you've got a sport that we don't have to take 10-year-olds and force them to compete at super high levels. They can do it when they're adults. And I think that's what most sports do. And I think that's important for the longevity of the sport and the health of the sport, is to see more older athletes at the higher levels. So you can always reach me at doc@gymnastcare.com or at sportsperformance.academy if you want to get a hold of me. So thank you all very much. And Ellie, I just want to say it was great getting to be here. This is the first time I've ever gotten to speak with you or talk with you. So it was fantastic. And Ian and Gina, great to see you. Thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Josh. We need to steal some of Oksana Chusovitnia's secrets, because that's definitely would be a wonderful future to see. Gina, please, final comments. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Great to be here. Obviously, as everybody else said, I think, throughout the years, my goals have changed, I think, and this will make sense. At first it was, let's rehab everyone from their injuries. Then it was, we're going to do prehab. Then it was, let's teach the coaches how to do things. And I think now it's just more of a culture change because we're in a pickle as a country and as a sport. And I think that pyramid that Josh talks about, I have a different way of explaining it, but I love Josh's, so we're just going to go with that, is that the gyms have to create a culture change that they are not to expect the kids to be on equipment and doing skills that will lead them to the next level for more than 50% of a practice, let's just say 50 to 60. The culture change has to be that, but in order to move up from level 6 to 7 or 7 to 8, it's not just a score, but it's a list of 50 things that gym has compiled that they have to perform conditioning wise that prepare them for skills 2 years out so that they can do drills this year and then learn something the next year. And it's all about backing up and planning out. When I work, I've done over 110 programs for gyms around the country. And some of them are, Gina, please come in. We've had Achilles issues. Tell us why. Others are, please redo my whole conditioning program. And to Ian's point, I have a really very long, intensive, it's 42 points of assessment with athletes for strength, flexibility, joint motion, et cetera. And every single kid is assessed. What I try to tell the coaches is everyone has individual time for 15 to 20 minutes before practice and 15 to 20 minutes after practice. And that is prehab, conditioning, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. But each kid gets something that they need to work on. And again, to Ian's point, you don't have to do wrist flexibility with someone that doesn't need it. But the kid that has too flexible of a wrist probably needs shoulder strength. So they have to take that time. Does that cost them money? Yes. Does it cost the gym money or the parents? It's up to them how they want to do it. But it's investing in the kids that are within the program. And I think it's investing in the education for the coaches. So that time spent is not just squat jumps again, lunge jumps again, hamstring curls again, and it's the same stuff over and over again, but we're really assessing what's important to the kids. Again, it's a culture change to teach the parents that these really intelligent gymnastics gym owners and coaches are not going to be doing bars for an hour and 20 minutes. You might be doing bars for 40 minutes, but then you're doing conditioning and body shaping and everything else for the rest of it, which will lead to a kid should learn a blind change in 2 days. Because if you understand how to shift your weight, because you've been doing back extension roll drills 2 years before, right, in level 8 or whatever, and you've got good core strength and understanding, it's just a means of getting the motion down. And as to Ellie, I always say if I were to go back right now, I'd be so much better than I was before because it's mechanics and it's understanding how to do it properly. So yeah, I guess my lasting comment that has nothing to do with today is please just be kind to your gymnasts and understand that their anxiety and their stress and the negativity that they feel when there is stress and there is, I'm disappointed in you, or why don't you have that skill back yet, literally will waterfall on these kids for life. I've been involved in 3 national level safe sport cases, and it is just literally almost changed my world in the past year. And there's so much more to, I love gymnastics, it's my life, right? But there's so much more to it than that. And the sport needs to teach us all that we care about the kids. Going back to culture change, the coaches do it because they care about you in the long run and they want you to be healthy. And be patient with us as medical providers. When we tell you it's 12 weeks, you're not going to make it shorter just because you think you can. You can't make an ACL go faster because the PT down the block says so. It just doesn't work that way. So don't push father time, and just be supportive of the progress that your kids are making. Positive attitude helps physiologically and mentally, and serotonin and cortisol levels and healing and sleep and everything. So especially in this return process, applaud everybody for where they are. You can find me online at MedGym, MEDGYM, medicalgymnastics.net. All kinds of presentation downloads, etc. Travel around the country. We do telemedicine stuff anywhere from $500 to $10,000. It depends on how big you want your program at the gym. But most of all, just the Facebook stuff and being involved and watching, like Ellie and Ian and Josh and I, and a few others that really do know what they're doing. And gymnastics is just following the chats that happen and listening in on the answers and just learning. It's don't ever stop learning. And thank you, John, so much for for the wonderful support USECA has had of me through my career. And we're so happy you're here doing this for coaches, athletes, and parents.
Thank you so much, Gina. So once again, I wish to thank all our panelists, Dr. Ian Kreider, Dr. Joshua Aldridge, Dr. Elspeth Hart, Gina Pongetti. Wealth of information. As you saw, our lecture could have gone much longer than the hour and a half, though we originally slated for an hour. So thank you so much for staying with us till the very end. On behalf of myself and Pat Goldsmith, have a wonderful weekend, and thank you for joining us on Coaches on Couches, episode 10, PreHab, ReHab, and our favorite habs. Have a great evening, everyone. Good night.
Thanks. Good night, everyone.
Once again, thank you for joining us on Coaches on Couches, episode 10, PreHab, ReHab, favorite habs from the experts. Please seek out all 4 of them. They are available online through social media and through their emails or internet websites. Dr. Ian Kreider, Dr. Joshua Aldridge, Dr. Elspeth Hart, Gina Pongetti, Angeletta, all of them are available and very, very willing to share information with you, your athletes, and your other coaches. Thank you again for following all the protocols, for listening to our episode. I also wish to thank Tumble Track, which is one of the sponsors of the Magma program and helping us with the USECA program. Finally, we have next week, episode 11, Trampoline Air Awareness and Flight. We have a wonderful cast for next week. We have Joy Umenhofer, as everyone knows, works for the national staff, a great clinician and trampolinist. We have Thomas Hamlin. We have Steve Gluckstein, of course, who competed on the Olympic and world level. And then we have Heather Edwards. So please join us next weekend at 8 p.m. on Friday for Coaches on Couches, episode 11, Trampoline. Once again, my name is John Min. I'm the USECA video chairman. I'm also the owner and head coach of Magma in New Jersey, Region 7. And my co-host, Pat Goldsmith from Niagara Gymnastics in New York. Have a wonderful weekend. Thank you again. And remember, keep learning, keep listening, and keep loving the sport. Thank you so much. Good night.